Greetings. Do without wilt shall be the whole of the law. I'm Lexi Eve, and welcome back to another Magick Without Tears video. Been about a month since the last upload, as I've been scaling back to refocus my energy, but I'm glad to be here today, discussing Chapter 10, the Scolex School. Let's begin. This is a relatively short chapter. It's about 2 pages. Crowley gives some practical points for Mackie and the reader. First off, about language. And then we're going to go into Madame Blavatsky's, at least one verse on her take on Buddha and Nirvana, or Nibbana. And just keep in mind, I have no problem admitting, I don't know why the chapter is titled as such, the Scolex School. But I did search the term, and I'll just quote what Google said. Quote, Scolex School is most likely a school that embraces the Scole philosophy, which involves a restful, disciplined, and purposeful approach to learning, end quote. And this would track based on the context of the chapter, as you'll see, especially towards the end. To begin the chapter, Kara Sora, do without wilt shall be the whole of the law. You actually want to know how to distinguish gold from copper pyrites, fool's gold. One pretty good plan is to take a masterpiece, pick out a page at random, translate it into French or German or whatever language you like best, walk around your chair 3 times so as to forget the English, and then translate it back again. You will gather a useful impression of the value of the masterpiece by noticing the kind of difficulty that arises in the work of translation. More, by observing the effect produced on you by reading over the result, and finally by estimating the retranslation. Has the effect of the original been enhanced by the work done on it? Has it become more lucid? Has it actually given you the information which it purported to do? End quote. Very intense practice. So you're picking a text in a foreign language, translating it to another language that you're not fluent in, taking a break to forget, most of it, and then translating it back and trying to really dive into the terminology being used. Because Crowley was a stickler for words, how words are used, and communication of ideas, speech, writing, all of those things are magical tools. So it's really important you understand how words are used, especially when you're doing occult practice, how you're using words. Really understanding the core of a text as well. I wish that we knew exactly what prompted this response from Crowley, whether it was about a specific book or a general question, but regardless, the idea is to really deep dive into what you are reading. And I'd say especially so when it comes to scripture and holy books, as opposed to more practical text. In today's world, with things like instant translator apps, I've noticed quite a few times that when you translate a sentence and then translate it back, sometimes words do change. For this practice, however, I would recommend using an actual dictionary, doing deep dives into the meaning of the words the author used, and try to come to the core of their meaning with your own word-by-word translation. This in addition to normal critical thinking and even Kabbalistic reading of the text. This is slightly different, but I once translated Kevin Kline's facsimile of John Dee's True and Faithful, page by page, from Latin into English. And yeah, the experience definitely gave me a deeper appreciation for the text. But to translate back and forth is a whole other thing, let alone 2 languages that you don't know, right? I'll also add, I found doing this practice most useful when attempting to discover a magical motto. Hebrew to Latin is one thing that I did, and it definitely gave me a way deeper appreciation, especially once I translated it back into Hebrew and seeing how the words changed or carried new connotations. Definitely gave me a whole new idea for a phrase I was working around with in my mind already. So I see this as a concurrent practice of using etymology. Tracing the roots of words and their syllables often yields greater insights into the word itself and an entire new connotation. Words spoken are spells, essentially. Speech is a human development symbolic of the logos of creation. The Logos is the Word of God that created the universe, right? And that's a symbolic process of spirit becoming fire, becoming, right, transmuting from this invisible light down into physical matter, and the crystallization of that light into dense physical opaque matter. And physics will even have like a same thing, right? It's like you have singularity or something non-comprehensible, that heat and vibration and expansion, sound essentially with the vibrations and the heat, friction, created particles, chemicals, complex organisms. So that's the physics, is the physical aspect of it, but then as occultists we're dealing with the spiritual as well. So we're dealing with things beyond physicality that are still present here that you could tap into, energies and whatnot. But so the Logos, that vibration, that heat, that fire coming from that spirit, that light, speech of the human variety is symbolic. We've evolved from a universe where the source of that universe is what we call that Logos of God, that sound. We have the ability to create sound and give it specific meanings based on the way it sounds. It creates connotations and ideas. So speech itself is a magical act. When you're speaking, you're carrying the connotations of the symbols of the sound of the words that you use. Unguarded speech destroys, and ignorant speech yields bitter fruit. So doing practices like this make you way more mindful of the meaning of the words that you use, the meanings of the words that you read, deeper insights into the psyche of the person who wrote the text that you read. In the Book of Thoth, Crowley gives the example of tracing the word fool back to its origin of phallus, meaning windbag, and pointing out that even its origin implies air. Various examples are sprinkled all through Crowley's books, from the Confessions to Magick Without Tears and Magic in Theory and Practice. If you ever don't fully understand something written by Crowley, definitely look at the etymology of the words he's using. Not only that, but do this for yourself when you are writing or transcribing a communication. If you're taking an astral trip, especially if there's something written that you're seeing, or you're getting a communication from a spirit while you're having an astral journey, write down what's said and then take time to really look at the connotations of the etymology of the words that that entity used. To continue with the chapter about translations, quote, "You will gather a useful impression of the value of the masterpiece by noticing the kind of difficulty that arises in the work of translation, more by observing the effect produced on you by reading over the result, and finally, by estimating the retranslation. Has the effect of the original been enhanced by the work done on it? Has it become more lucid? Has it actually given you the information which it purported to do? I'm giving you credit for the unusual ability. This test is not easy to make, and obviously you may have spoiled the whole composition, especially where its value depends on its form rather than on its substance. But we are not considering poetry or poetic prose. All we want is intelligible meaning." End quote. So here's the next point. This is a thought experiment in critical thinking training for the mind. Be skeptical with the results. You are more training your mind to read deeper into words and understand concealed meanings than you are looking to glean some remarkable insight. Though, by going through this practice, you should more fully understand the text and illuminate its meaning to yourself. So you may very well get some type of insight as a result, but the main point is training your mind through a discipline to critically read, critically think much deeper. Quote, "It does not follow that a passage is nonsensical because you fail to understand it. It may simply be too hard for you. When Bertrand Russell writes, 'We say that a function R is ultimately Q convergent A if there is a member Y of the converse domain of R and the field of Q such that the value of the function for the argument Y and for any argument to which Y has the relation Q is a member of A.' Do we? But you do not doubt that if you were to learn the meaning of all these unfamiliar terms, you would be able to follow his thought." End quote. For fun, I want to break down this quote by Bertrand Russell. Now, I'm not a mathematician, but Russell's works are so good, I'm not going to pass up the opportunity to talk briefly about this. To use any formula, I find for myself it is clearer to plug in numbers using a hypothetical experiment once you understand what the formula represents. Convergent basically is a number within a projected time frame or scale. This is useful for weather patterns, ecological concerns, physics, even mapping things on the tree of life. Well, let's take wolves as an example. We're going to reintroduce wolves to a specific land to help maintain the overabundance of other wildlife. To do so, we need to monitor and keep a population of wolves within a certain set of numbers so that they do not become overpopulated and therefore overhunt, but too few wolves will not keep the right balance either. So let's say 300 to 350 wolves in a particular area is exactly perfect for maintaining the proper numbers of other wildlife. So 300 to 350 is our scale represented by the letter A. R then is the population of the year. We introduce 60 and in year 1, and each year they reproduce slightly. So within 10 years we end up reaching 320 wolves. Q represents the population as greater than or equal to our scale of 300 to 350. Next, Y is our picked year out of, let's say, these 10, 15 year time frames, right? So Y is going to be the year that we pick to look at to specifically know if we are within our scale of 300 to 350. At year 9, let's say we have 302 wolves. Then, like I said, by year 10, we had 320. So 302 is our letter R. So like I said, in this case, the letter R is 302 wolves is greater than or equal to our scale A of 300 to 350 in the 9th year, which is Y. So yes, R is Q convergent to A in the function argument of Y. Like I said, this can be used to even sum up mystical states and track progress of the magician. You could use this for keeping track of your asana if you were really nerdy about it, right? And you could plug in things like I had joint problems when I started asana. I was going through hormonal replacement and my hips were widening, and you could track whether your joints are feeling well by the amount of minutes that you are sitting within an asana position. So if your aim is to get to that 1 hour mark doing Libre E in asana, and basically you could use this formula to plug in your overall health, track the progress of, let's say, your joints or inflammation or muscle strain, or even the amount of movements, breaks that you have during the asana practice, given a set amount of time over the course of many trials, right? You could use it to pay attention to what time of the day you're doing it. You could get very nerdy using mathematical formulas. You could also use this to track the progress of the universe. You can use this to track things in, government and geological, political eventualities and statistics. You could do a lot with mathematical formulas if you really understand the concepts. But we're dealing with mysticism and magic, so you can do this for, like I said, mapping things on the tree of life, etc., etc. For the remainder of the chapter, Crowley switches to the subjects of Buddhism and Nibbana, commenting upon the ideas of Liber 71, The Voice of the Silence by Madame Blavatsky. So it's going to be a specific verse. I'll get into that in a second. It's the second part of that book, which is from the Blue Equinox. You can find it. Quote, "To don Nirmanakaya's humble robe is to forego eternal bliss for self, to help on man's salvation. To reach nirvana's bliss, but to renounce it, is the supreme, the final step, the highest on the renunciation's path." End quote. So like I said, this is a quote from Blavatsky's writing as aforementioned. I believe it's verse 42 of the second part. Crowley will comment upon it, and I'll just do my best to explain the more technical terminology. Nirmanakaya's robe is the traditional saffron robes Buddhists wear in the likeness of Siddhartha. There are basically three manifestations of Buddha. Nirmanakaya is the physical manifestation of a Buddha incarnate, presumably as a human. The highest form is that in which all things have a Buddha nature. So think Ein Sof, how there's this aspect of the limitless nothingness, the number zero, ever present in all things. Then there's sort of an intermediary, and that's the body of bliss, which has infinite forms. And this last one is very interesting as it is infinite. It is ultimately fourth or maybe even fifth dimensional, existing in all things, in all times, and places simultaneously. So, this quote seems to insinuate the idea that wearing a Buddhist robe is to automatically become a renunciate. Essentially, a bodhisattva is what that verse is claiming, and this is not true. Not every Buddhist practitioner is going to swear the bodhisattva vow. Wearing the Buddhist robes means that you're seeking enlightenment and to actually reach nirvana. So you're trying to live a holy life of asceticism in accordance with the Dharma, so you could be absorbed into that nothingness, is the belief going on there. It's actually the opposite of the bodhisattva, who has the potential right now to reach that, but is giving it up in order to either stay on earth or one of the heavens, or keep coming back and back and back in order to make sure that all other beings are enlightened before oneself. So it's like an ultimate martyr sacrifice in Buddhist canon. I would also mention that to don the robes of an occult practitioner, especially those that Thelemites wear, is to incur the penalty of assuming that role of an initiate. In short, you are going to invoke the energies proper to the robe that you choose to wear, and whether you're prepared for that or not, you're going to have the universe begin to treat you as though you were on the level of that which you are claiming to be by wearing that robe, especially if it has certain insignia upon it. Same thing as saying a person who swears the oath of the abyss invokes that state of the Magister Template upon them. Or that by using the grade signs of AA, you're invoking the energy of the grade according to the Sephiroth attributed to that grade sign. Now, whether you could handle that energy and state of being or not, you're going to experience it, be treated that way by the universe, and either assimilate or go crazy. I'll digress. From here, let's turn it over to Crowley. I'll say now, Buddhism is one of my lesser interests. I know a bit. It's not my strongest suit. I'll elucidate by necessity for the sake of definition. I'll agree and disagree with some stuff, but I'm just going to read much of the rest of the chapter, but I'll add some practical stuff here and there. Quote, follows a common sense comment by Frater O.M. All this about Gautama Buddha having renounced nirvana is apparently all a pure invention of Madame Blavatsky, and has no authority in the Buddhist canon. The Buddha is referred to again and again as having passed away by that kind of passing away which leaves nothing whatever behind. End quote. The term in Sanskrit, Parinibbana, which is what she used, does appear as the title of a book, the Mana Parinibbana Sutta, and that was published by Theravada monks in the 4th century BCE. The text does speak about the end of Siddhartha's life and his absorption into Nibbana. The title literally means Great Total Liberation. Parinibbana doesn't appear to be widely used as a term otherwise. I could be wrong in that, but to my knowledge, it's not a widely used term. And if it is used, it just means the same thing as Nirvana, and Crowley's going to disseminate his opinions on this, that you can't have different levels of nirvana. You either have one thing, there's nothingness, you can't have nothing beyond nothing, right? And if even in Kabbalah, we have 3 veils, which are symbolized by the number 0, but they're veils that bridge between Kether and the nothingness, and above the abyss, there's no form anyway, everything's in perpetual union. everything beyond those veils, there's nothing. So nirvana, parinibbana, mahaparinibbana, they're all dealing with the number 0 beyond the 3 veils. There's no way to break 0 in half. There's no way to step beyond the number 0. In mathematics, there are negative numbers, but there is not negative aspects to the universe. There's just 0. 0, it stops there, right? Negative numbers only come into play once you get to physicality, because it creates an opposition. And anything that has opposition is below the abyss. Anything that opposition is in union is above the abyss, right? So if you have -1 and +1, you can have opposites. -2, +2, opposites. You can't have -0 and +0. Impossible, right? So Nibbana deals with what is beyond, let's say, the 3 veils Kabbalistically, although I don't want to necessarily mix the planes, but you can plug things into the tree of life in that way, right? So, anyway, Mahapani as partial title of the text that deals with this, by all evidence, the title is just a mere emphasis of the Buddha's death and his passing away into nirvana as a completion of its karmic bonds to the physical manifestation in Siddhartha. So he, according to this doctrine, received great total liberation. That's it. There's nothing past that. Liberation, done. The Bodhisattva still incurs karmas, but probably negates them very quickly. So it's like an instant karma, instant unkarma, instant karma, instant unkarma. Right? So it's kind of like this bridge right before actually dissolving into that nothingness. So it's like a perpetual wheel spinning at full speed, whereas Buddha's wheel has ceased. That's it. It's the center spoke. There's no motion in the exact center. There's a microscopic negative space of nothingness, and that's what's in that wheel of samsara. There's nothing there. It's that kernel, that Ein Sof. Same things I always describe it as. To continue, quote, the account of his doing this is given in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, and it was the contention of the Theosophists that this great sublime Nibbana story was something peculiar to Gautama Buddha. They began to talk about Parinibbana, meaning super Nibbana, as if there were some way of subtracting one from one, which would leave a higher superior kind of a nothing, or as if there were some way of blowing out a candle which would leave Moses in a much more Egyptian darkness than we ever supposed when we were children. This is not science. This is not business. This is American Sunday journalism. The Hindu and the American are very much alike in this innocence and naivety, which demands fairy stories with ever bigger giants. They cannot bear the idea of anything being complete and done with, so they are always talking in superlatives, and are hard put to it when the facts catch up with them and they have to invent new superlatives. End quote. Let's pause here a moment. We see this especially in American Christianity today. We see it with the conspiracy theorists, followers of QAnon, Ancient Aliens, Alex Jones, David Icke. Nothing can simply be just as it is. Reality is interesting enough, but everyone has to have a story to spin a tale better than the next person. Truth be damned. These same lack the critical thinking abilities to sit down and contemplate, look at facts, and draw a likely conclusion to which doesn't need a giant leap of faith between evidence to connect unrelated things. And also being open that more evidence might present itself later, and your opinion should change as more evidence presents itself. The biggest problem in this sense is that sensationalism sells. And these same sots are all grifters, preying on the terminally stupid. Quote, instead of saying that there are bricks of various sizes and specifying those sizes, they have a brick and a super brick, and one brick and some brick. And when they have got to the end, they chase through the dictionary for some other epithet to brick, which shall excite the sense of wonder at the magnificent progress and super progress. I present the American public with this word, which is supposed to have been made. Probably the whole thing is a bluff without a single fact behind it. Almost the whole of the Hindu psychology is an example of this kind of journalism. They are not content with the supreme God. The other man wishes to show off by having a supremer God than that, and when a third man comes along and finds them disputing, it is up to him to invent a supremist super God. End quote. I'll just say clearly not much has changed since Crowley wrote this letter, as we still live in a world of mine is bigger than yours mentality. Quote, "It is simply ridiculous to try to add the definition of nibbana by this invention of Parinibbana, and only talkers busy themselves with these fantastic speculations. The serious student minds his own business, which is the business at hand. The president of a corporation does not pay his bookkeeper to make a statement of the countless billions of profit to be made in some future year. It requires no great ability to string a row of zeros after a significant figure until the ink runs out. What is wanted is the actual balance of the week. The reader is most strongly urged not to permit himself to indulge in fantastic flights of thought, which are the poison of the mind, because they represent an attempt to run away from reality, a dispersion of energy, and a corruption of moral strength. His business is, firstly, to know himself, secondly, to order and control himself, thirdly, to develop himself on sound organic lines little by little." End quote. The distractions that we face today are not so dissimilar. We have endless news cycles with breaking news notifications every 5 minutes. Social media opinions are the worst of it in today's world. Short videos, scrolling, which leads to even shorter attention spans. Really, the inability to use smartphones responsibly is probably one of the most detrimental things mankind's psyche has to grapple with right now. Computers are tools, not a necessity to life. Take dire note of Libro, section 1, verse 2 and 3, quote, "In this book it is spoken of the Sephiroth and the paths, of spirits and conjurations, of gods, spheres, planes, and many other things which may or may not exist. It is immaterial whether these exist or not. By doing certain things, certain results will follow. Students are most earnestly warned against attributing objective reality or philosophic validity to any of them. The advantages to be gained from them are chiefly these: A widening of the horizon of the mind, B, an improvement of the control of the mind." End quote. You'll come to terms later on with the reality of spiritual beings and planes. So instead of the newcomer hyper-focusing on altered states of consciousness and self-induced hallucinations, it is mandated right at the beginning of Libra O that they dismiss worrying about such things at the beginning, so they do not create illusions which taint their perception of reality later on. You don't want yourself running into fantasy, grasping at straws, looking for things that are not there. But as this text also says in that last previous quote, the point is to discipline the mind, and I'll add body, but to discipline the mind, and to broaden the mind past its current limitations. This requires concentration, an understanding of the point of doing such practices, to liberate oneself, and to be as true to your nature as is possible. Also to improve that nature and build it up increment by increment until it's broader, stronger, however you want to phrase that. So to continue with Magick Without Tears, chapter 10, quote, "There is, however, a sense in which the service of humanity is necessary to the completeness of the adept. He is not to fly away too far." Some remarks on this course are given in the note to the next verse. The student is also advised to take note of the conditions of membership of the AA in the Equinox Volume 3, Number 1, Supplement, pages 57 to 59. So, let's just read Blavatsky's verse, which is what he's referring to. It's the same text, The Voice of the Silence, and Crowley's comment upon that verse. So the previous verse that we read above was verse 42, so we're talking about verse 43, quote, "Know, O discipline, this is the secret path selected by the Buddhas of perfection, who sacrificed the self to the weaker selves." End quote. So that's Blavatsky's verse. Crowley's comment, quote, "This is a statement of the conditions of performing the alchemical operation indicated in the injunction coagula. In Salve, the adept arises upward. He casts off everything that he has and is. But after reaching the supreme triad, he aspires downwards. He keeps on adding to all that he has or is, but after another manner. This part of our treatise is loathsomely sentimental twaddle, what America, God bless her, calls sob stuff. When tipsy old ladies become maudlin, it is time to go. End quote. So here it's just saying that the job of the adept upon reaching the inner part of Tiferet, 5 equals 6 within, they've achieved knowledge and conversation. Now comes a breaking down and a removal of all things, preparing all karma, all baggage, as much as possible to make that journey through the abyss. That's the salve phase, the breaking down. Above the abyss, the Magister Templii is charged to understand all things. Hence, they are going to reincorporate all aspects of the universe as their being, into their being. It's the one joining with the many, the individual joining with the all. So that's a coagula, and that requires extreme acts of service. Back to Magick Without Tears. Quote, "So much for the green tree, now for the dry. We come down to the average popular teacher, the mere humbug. Read this. One day quite soon, an entirely different kind of electricity will be discovered, which will bring as many profound changes into human living as the first type did. This new electricity will move in a finer ether than does our familiar kind, and thus will be nearer in vibration to the 5th dimension, to the innermost source of things, that realm of withinness, wherein all is held poised by a colossal force, that same force which is packed within the atom. Electricity number 2 will be unthinkably more powerful than our present electricity number 1. End quote, and this is from Vera Alder's The 5th Dimension, page 132. So essentially what Crowley quoted from Alder is about harnessing, I guess you could say, the energy of the oneness, but it still seems like it's talking about the physical plane, but I'm going to bring this to a more spiritual aspect. So I would argue what they're talking about is harnessing an energy that is more of the oneness of reality, more of the true reality, if you will, in a Plato's dualistic sense. The fluid energy of the subtle body permeating the universe. So if you notice above, I used the terms 4th and 5th dimensions way earlier, not realizing that Crowley would later quote from Alder's book. So in closing, let me just give a couple of definitions of what these terms mean. Obviously, we live in 3 dimensions: up, down, left, right, forward, back. The 4th dimension is time, decomposition across space of 3 dimensions. We exist in all dimensions, but we experience only the sliver of time which is now, while all other time is happening outside of our perception, past, present. A 4th dimensional being would then either see all of time within the universe, or at least be able to traverse it, the same as we do for 3D space, though we're stuck in this particular moment of now in the 4th dimension. A 5th dimensional being would then theoretically be able to traverse all of time and space throughout all of the universes which exist that started with a Big Bang, that are similar in comparison to ours. So it wouldn't be infinite possible universes that have nothing in likeness with the physical reality that we have here. That would be a 6th dimensional being. They could traverse possibilities, things that do not even exist, or that exist in such a form that there is no comprehension to most of them, or are just so entirely foreign and alien that we might not even recognize that as a universe if we saw it. In Vera Alder's book, she's writing with a very heavy bias in favor of theosophy. I don't believe she was a theosophist. It was more like a neo-theosophist movement, right? There was a lot of breaking apart in sort of lineages, and she followed, I believe, Bailey, and so it becomes muddled. You know, I don't follow like the lines of succession of theosophists and people who broke away from theosophy but kept trying to make a more pure form of it by taking the teachings of Blavatsky or Krishnamurti, right? I don't follow all of that drama, or whatever you want to call it, lineages, for lack of a better word. but it seems like she was in one of those offshoots that stemmed from Theosophy, but still held on to the Theosophical doctrines laid out by Blavatsky. And this book, The Fifth Dimension, she's writing more about meditation as a tool to awaken consciousness to universal perception and absorption, to reach oneness within the universe in the here and now through a three-dimensional existence, I guess by touching that seed of nothingness within oneself. So she's not wrong about the ability of meditation to do this, but I do find a lot of the wording in her book misleading to today's reader. Note, she was also a physicist. She wasn't a physicist, but her cousin was a physicist, and she was following his work very closely. I believe he was a quantum physicist, probably in 40s and 50s, something like that. So she was very well versed in physics, but she seemed to take terminology from physics and use it in her own way, which isn't aligned with terms like fourth, fifth, sixth dimensions as we understand them commonly today. So, like I said, she's not wrong about the ability of meditation to do this. It's just I find the wording problematic, which we started this chapter talking about how words are very important. If you're an occultist and have some minor knowledge of the theory of relativity and of quantum physics, you'll understand exactly what I mean if you read her books. And you'll be able to discern what she is saying regardless of the words she chooses. However, I will say her book, The Fifth Dimension, is on the AA Extended Curriculum, and it is most certainly worth a read at any phase of a student's career. Love is the law, love under will. Look forward to catching y'all in the next one.